Learning Planet Institute.
Welcome to today's R&D Unplugged, a podcast from the Learning Planet Institute dedicated to discussing with researchers on the impact of their work in a simple way. My name is Anna-Lena. I'm your host today, and today's guest is Marc Santolini. He is a practitioner researcher studying collective intelligence, open innovation, and relational well-being in complex systems. Welcome, Marc.
Hello.
You have a dual background in complex systems physics and epistemology, hold a PhD from École Normale Supérieure here in Paris, and have specialized in network science at the Barabasi Lab in Boston. You now lead the Interaction Data Lab here at the Learning Planet Institute, where you integrate network approaches, participatory methodologies, and AI to enhance collaborative dynamics. You also co-founded Just One Giant Lab to foster large-scale open research communities, and you now explore how wisdom traditions and facilitation practices can inform systemic transformation. Wow, that's a list of interests. Before we dive deeper into the different shapes of your research, maybe let me ask a less conventional question. If your research had a theme song, what would it be and why?
Well, I think it would probably be I Want to Break Free.
I want to break free. I want to break free. I want to break free.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, I've been working in many disciplines in physics, biology, with sociologists, organizational scientists, now psychologists. And I think in my career path, each time I felt really too much within one discipline, I needed to break out. Nothing to do with, with that discipline, but just, I think, a sense of curiosity, really strong curiosity. Yeah.
Okay. I'll directly pick that word actually up, curiosity. That leads me to my first question, like real serious question. What inspired you or what made you curious to pursue this particular research topic you're working right now on?
I think it traced back to when I was an undergrad and I had this dual interest into complex systems, which is how do collectives achieve a unity state? You take molecules, they can make a cell, cells together, they can make an organism, people together, they make a group, and there's this sense that something emerges each time that is new, that is different. So I had this interest into, how do you create these unities? And in parallel to that, I was also very interested in the philosophical aspect to that, which is this question of emergence. How do we know something emerges, like a new property, new affordance of a system, new meaning in a system emerges? And these past few years, working really at the level of social groups and communities, it's been very interesting because, it's hard to ask proteins how something emerges. But you can talk with people and you can see how do they actually work out making a group cohesive. And you can really study the way people navigate this information that is encoded in the social network in the group. And so, my research has really turned towards really being in contact with where the meaning is being made of this capacity of being together, of being brought to a collective state. And so I came from being much more formal about it, using network approaches and descriptions and quantitative aspects, to realizing the need also of much more qualitative work and interview-based and trying to really get constructs from the stakeholders themselves.
That's interesting. You really come from a more hard science background, actually, and really now diving deeper into the meaning on the personal level. I'm really curious what you'll answer to my future questions. Because you already mentioned actually emerging problems, new meaning, or finding meaning in new systems, my question would be, how does your research actually contribute to the issues that the world is facing at the moment?
Well, when I arrived at the LPI, which was actually in 2018, the goal at the time was really to help citizen science movement and open science movement and open source communities understand what makes them perform well and how can they sustain their activities to solve some challenges that require many stakeholders, many disciplines. And so the impact was to actually implement programs and to monitor, evaluate how they're operating. And so some impacts, in the last few years were implementing communities of thousands of people, transdisciplinary communities where even a high school student could become a coordinator or manager of scientific projects done by the crowd. And so the impact was not only in the ability of people to innovate and I would say deliver new products or learn, but there was also an impact that I realized at some point was about the way people participate in those ecosystems and the meaning it can make to them to meet very diverse people that are aligned in solving big things. And so the impact lens changed a lot for me from a more output-driven to a more participatory-driven. What is the impact that participation has on people in terms of learning or in terms even of their relational capacity to hold these very diverse components, diverse personality, diverse disciplines around. And in the more recent, I would say last 2 years maybe, as we began to work more with these constructs on participation, on relational well-being, the impact became clearer or more directed towards also something that feels sometimes like a healing space, where it's not just about science and debating and being right, but also something about, being in a microcosm of communities where you learn how to navigate the complexity of the world. And so it's also what I've seen with the type of implementation of certain facilitation practices or studying certain group practices is that they have an impact in, for example, aspects such as cognitive complexity and the ability of people to welcome very, very different and sometimes triggering viewpoints and hold that, right? And be able to bring that part of the journey of the group. And I would say now that's kind of how my interest has shifted somehow from maybe innovation and knowing to also this kind of participation and the healing potential of this participatory framework for groups and individuals.
It's a really interesting approach, I think, especially that issues we're facing right now, they're becoming really personal. I really like that approach of the healing space, because I think in the current world, where we are kind of overwhelmed by the news every day coming on us, I think it's an interesting but also important approach actually to take, to look more also into the inside. I like the relational well-being you mentioned. It's I think it's an interesting approach to consider, especially seeing what's going on in the world right now. You already mentioned a bit your journey of the research. Maybe you could tell us some of the key findings or insights from your research. Maybe did any results surprise you or even challenge existing assumptions?
Well, I would say the earlier part of research we've done on communities was really related to things like, for example, the fact that there are problems that can emerge, systemic problems that can emerge in a group, even considering in that case it was some collaboration network between teams, and we would see some stratification happening in this ecosystem where people entering the system but entering through the periphery would not be able to join the center anymore at some point, and there will be this kind of what is called a rich club in network science appearing. And so the first thing that in some sense was a bit not necessarily surprising, but became evident from these studies is how fast a system can stratify and can create an actual some inequity. Beginning depending on how you enter the system, at some point you don't have equal chance depending on where you are located in that network. So there was something first that was the realization of, even outside of the institutions, etc., very quickly you can recreate systemic effects. And that led to realization of the need for having this sense of metacognition be more available within the system, so that people can actually see that there is a systemic, maybe the process that creates some systemic stratification or structuration. And that led to studying more, I would say, influencing the processes and the metacognition on these processes. So some interesting outcomes we've had is that you can actually decide to, so we've had some team formation, I would say, algorithm to change a bit how a team is set up and how does that change performance. And we looked at the performance in terms of outcome, in terms of the final score, and performance in terms of the ability of people to learn new skills or to navigate relationality, or even to improve some dimensions of subjective or relational well-being. And we did find that actually, usually we always look at one lens, which is the outcome of performance lens for these systems. And it's very sensitive to having diverse competencies to solve the project. And on the other hand, the learnings in terms of social or relational competencies was actually driven more by having personality diversity. And so we saw appear, in a way, different parameters that can influence different aspects. Some influence more the process and some influence more the outcome. And I guess what was interesting for us was to see if we actually begin to look at the process itself and not just the outcome, and the way the process is digested by people into competencies, we can see some interesting parameters that we might want to tweak in the design of things like challenge-based education. So that was an encouragement for us to kind of, go further into monitoring these processes. And that's what we're doing now through the implementation of practices, by doing a lot of longitudinal self-reports and going really into the way facilitation or the way group navigation influences people at a really phenomenological level, at a really relational level. And actually, it led us to, quite interestingly, have to work with more psychologist-oriented therapists, group therapists, who are very knowledgeable about this tension dynamic in groups.
Yeah, I can directly see why you work with so many disciplines, because the work cannot just be placed in one discipline. And I think it's good to get actually the input, the expertise from so many different sides. I found really interesting when you mentioned you're focusing more on the process, so the social competencies actually, instead of the output of the performance. Well, we all kind of know that our education system right now, in the end, what's measured is our performance after class. That's the grade that's important to get into a good university. So what would interest me now, and I'm sure also our listeners, is how do you make now the bridge between the research, your outcomes you found, and actually real life?
So there's a few things on that. And actually, that's quite timely because I'm currently participating in a residency that's organized by the Erasmus Plus program on the pedagogies of togetherness, right? And the use of what is called social arts and embodied practices for education. And we're actually working hand in hand with educators to not only implement practices, but also see how we can monitor and evaluate. Because often there's a know-how from people that are not in the traditional system usually, but sometimes they are and they're just unseen. But there's a know-how, but it's yet, there's not a bridge to an institutionalization. So for now, the best I've seen into typically what would my research convert into is by going and examining the approaches in Bhutan. So that was last October. I traveled there for a conference on a Bhutan Innovation Forum. And I met their principal of a school from the Happy School Network. And in that school, they actually implement practices from 6 years old to 18 years old that are really about learning relational competencies, but also learning to express subjective aspects such as the emotional wheel, like how do the student or the kids, how do they feel about others, and they invite not just the kids but also the staff, the parents sometimes, and so they have this aspect of creating this trickle-down effect of bringing not just these competencies to the kids, but as a way that can actually create a network in the community of maybe improving some competencies of listening, or things like that. And the other thing in Bhutan I saw, so that was a particular school, but the other thing is discussing with, at the more, I would say, a Ministry of Education scale, seeing how they genuinely try to have participatory approaches to involve the stakeholders in the education domain and to renew every 5 years the set of measures they have so that they are more suited to the needs at that time, and that they also fit to what they call the growth national happiness measures, which is 9 measures that do include culture or that do include happiness in general, that is measured through several metrics. And their approach is not only very informed by the literature, but the closest I've seen to what you find with constructs like the relational well-being, which is situated, meaning that it's actually informed by co-design strategies with the stakeholders to better fit to the needs. And so I guess that's kind of, for me, how the best of how this research could translate into promoting these kind of spaces for involving the different stakeholders in the education space, and also bringing some practices at school that are just about bringing this competency to talk about yourself and about the way you feel about the relationships, just to learn how to navigate that in a space where you can be vulnerable to talk about it.
Yeah, I think this is something that is not really supported at the moment in our education system, or rarely. I think it's really a personal choice of a teacher or maybe head of school who really wants to implement that, but not on a large scale. And I think it's something you said, that actually it needs a flexible system also that is reevaluated regularly and really includes the most current research outputs and the new findings to really always fit actually to the current needs of the young people. Thank you for sharing your experience from Bhutan. That sounds really interesting. Maybe do you have any anecdote or story where your research directly impacted or changed actually someone's life?
Well, I have stories of my early research career where I remembered meeting someone who had read my paper, like a young student who had read my paper, and it made the student choose to do a PhD on that topic, which was the first time I was like, oh, someone is reading my paper. Really?
Doesn't happen to all of us.
So there was such a case. But I think, interestingly, now, at least in the past few years, the kind of impact I've seen maybe has to do more with the raising awareness aspects. And I think the fact that it can be seriously and rigorously assessed that, some of these containers and facilitation schemes and participatory approaches are important is very validating for people that are, in a way, doing this work underground very often, or in third places, or in a kind of more maybe informal fabric in our society. And so there's an aspect which is giving credit and giving some kind of a recognition of their already existing practices that I'm just pointing out.
Yeah, I never heard about this school in Bhutan, and when you told me the first time about it, because it's not the first time right now I hear about it, and saw the pictures, it does look amazing. So really thank you for sharing this, and I think it's great to really give a voice to these initiatives and, like you say, raising awareness so other people can check it out, see what they're actually doing, take it as an example, taking inspiration, and just trying to do the same in their community or in their network they're working. So you just mentioned that a student actually read your paper and then decided to go in this field. This leads me to my last question of today. Let's pretend I'm 20 years old and I want to change the world for the better. Why should I engage in research, first of all? And why should I choose your research topic? Not easy.
Not easy. And I like that you say join research versus one could say join academia, because I think we should join research. And research can happen in so many places, in
Agreed.
academia and outside of academia.
Yeah.
And I think research is about a process of being very settled in curiosity and open-mindedness. And I think these are qualities that everybody should have, right? That's a quality that you see in kids. And I think what I would advise is to everyone to have this quality of researcher, of curiosity, of looking for literature that makes them, wanting an insatiable want to really understand something. I think this is beautiful quality. So I think research, in a way, as this kind of open-minded curiosity is very important. And I do think that research on things that are related to maybe how some social processes can be healing, for example, for community. And not just about understanding things like structure or quantitative equations, which are useful, technically speaking, but also having that angle that research can have an impact that is maybe not necessarily through your paper, but also through the community you're working with, and that the processes that are engaged can be actually having an impact, for social health in a way. I do believe this is very needed in our world today. I don't think we need more understanding or more, in a way, I don't think we need more equations necessarily to describe society, but I do feel we need a lot of space to be held also for health. So I do see a value maybe for researchers as healers, to arise from this youth.
That's interesting. It's a really, I think I didn't expect it to, your answer to go that way. But I think what you said settled in curiosity and open-mindedness. This is exactly what we would like to teach actually to the youth in schools and universities, to ask the questions, to be critical, to, always go further. And it's true, this is what you actually do through research. So thank you for that. I think also you directly answered the question about your research topic. And I think the healing you say, and that it's through the community, it's something right now in this world a lot of people need to go through every day, to go through the news we're hearing every day that can be really heavy on us sometimes. So I think this feeling of community and the social processing you mentioned, I think it's beautiful. Thank you for this ending. And I think that actually wraps up today's episode of our R&D Unplugged podcast. I'm Annalena Neurohr, your host of today. A huge thank you to our guest, Marc Santolini, for sharing his valuable insights and expertise with us. Thank you for being here today, Marc. It was great.
Thank you.
Also, a big thank you to all our listeners who joined us for today's episode. R&D Unplugged is a Learning Plan Institute podcast. This episode was produced by Annalena Neurohr and Chapner Star, with recording and editing by Jean-Marc Savin. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. You can find all of them and further information about all our activities on our website at learningplaninstitute.org/podcast. That's it for today. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you next time.
Learning Planet Institute.